the corporations don't want people to be big tribal organisations. They don't want people to get along, because the more divided we are, the more money they make. Yeah, so they both were in a thing called Australian Life. And the one there that you can see, that one there, that's of a guy called Uncle Max Van Nulo, and he was doing a smoking ceremony in Wallara, and basically the little girl in that is the sister of a boy called, I think it's Sam Coulter, and he's a professional surfer, and he was in a movie. It was really brilliant, actually. He was in a movie, there's a thing called The Mentalist. He's an actor, he's an Australian actor.
The Mentalist actor.
Yeah, that guy. Anyway, so Sam Coulter's this little girl's sister, and that's Uncle Max Van Nulo, who was doing the smoking at Wallara. So, yeah. And the reason that one's actually in my room is because when I was a very little girl, my father was a journalist, and he used to get lots of tickets to take me and my brothers and sisters to various different events. And I was taken when I was about 4 years old, about the same age as that little girl, and I had white blonde hair as well. I was taken to a thing called I thought that they were called the Tin Tupies, and it was a puppet show, and it was run by all of these blackfellas, and I didn't realise at the time that there was any difference. And I remember this guy, you can't actually see it clearly from where you're sitting, but Uncle Max has taken, she's Sam Coulter's sister, but is holding her hand, and the little girl is looking at Uncle Max's hand, and it's all, it's black and it's skinny and all the rest of it. And she's looking at the two hands joining together. And I remember clearly when I was about 4 years old, it was one of my first memories of just seeing, because when you're little, you only see, people's hands and up to their waist and stuff like that. So I really, as a visual person, I clearly remember just seeing this guy holding my hand and me looking at the difference between the black and the white. And anyway, so they were called the Tin Tupies, right? I always tried to track down the Tin Tupies. I wanted to see them again and again, because they had these great stories about kangaroos and, wallabies and wombats and the sun and, where to get water from and stuff like that. They were little puppets. And I could never find the Tin Tupies. And then I remember my dad talking about who I thought were the Tin Tupies, and saying it was really sad because they'd been taken out of their country and they were in another part of the country. And I remember thinking, oh, that's really sad that the Tin Tupies have been moved off their country. And it took me years and years and years to figure it out. Where these people were from were the Pinchipi tribe. And I went looking for the Tin Tupies all my life because they made such an impression on me. And eventually I started working, pretty closely with Aboriginal people, and then I realised that it was the Pinchipi people that I was talking about. So that photo has a huge resonance for me because it sort of really describes how I became involved with Indigenous issues, and it's really my life work. So, that's why I have it in my bedroom, because it's a really personal idea of who I was and where I came from and how I came to be where I am now. So, yeah, that's a very long-winded way of saying hello.
That's a beautiful story, Lisa. As you're telling me how they'll do the puppet shows and talk about how to find water, how to find food, how to survive, all those things, is that something tribes or Aboriginals still do? Are there sort of camping trips where they go out and they hunt and they sort of spend the weekend out in the wild and they just eat what they sort of can catch? Is that still a thing?
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. Culture, Aboriginal culture is alive and well in this country. And so many people misinterpret the understanding of Aboriginal people to the country we call Australia, because they see it very much through a white perspective. And even though, we have immigrants from all over the world, when you come here, it is still essentially very much based on white colonial ideals. So everyone fits into that kind of understanding. Aboriginal people, I have a dear friend of mine. I live on Ngarigo country, which is the Snowy Mountains. And, it's astonishing because when my friend comes here, Michelle comes here, she can tell me everything about what's going on with the weather, what's going on with the animals, what the names for things are, where to plant trees. Now, she lives in Canberra, but that understanding she has is like 60,000 years old in the one place. So it doesn't just go away in 250 years, all of those understandings and those perspectives are still there. And if we really want to understand this country, this land, the dirt beneath our feet, then the best person to ask is a black fella, because, just most people don't perceive it that way in Australia because they have no understanding or have taken a very different perspective about the country. I mean, those viewpoints, fortunately, are changing. But I was born here in Australia, and it's taken me a lifetime to learn a lot of this stuff. But we can go out camping, and we can, but it's a desolate landscape. But when you speak to a blackfellow about his own country, it's just full of ideas and people and animals, and it's just thick with beauty, yes, Aboriginal people still can carry on a reasonably traditional life, but let's face it, we're all urbanised now. No one really lives traditional lives anywhere on the planet anymore. But just because you've got a mobile phone doesn't mean that you don't have an understanding of where you come from or how it works, so.
That's amazing. Now, your friend Michelle, how did she learn all that? How did she learn how to read the weather, read the clouds, know where to plant plants? Was it passed down from her parents? And what is she doing now? Is that something she does for a living? And do you feel like this knowledge is fading away with each new generation?
No, absolutely not. I think it's getting stronger with every new generation. I mean, because people are actually listening a lot more to people. I wish Michelle was here, or Gummeroy was here, or Barbara were here, because, when you sit down and speak to any of these folk, you will understand a lot more. You're aware maybe that a very famous actor, a man called Uncle Jack Charles, just passed away, and I met Uncle Jack a number of years ago, and his words to me were, I asked him if I could take some photos, and he was fine with that, and he said, look, I don't care. I said, and he got taken away from his family and from his culture and from every understanding of blackfellow understanding that was right there in front of him. And it took him nearly till the end of his life to find out who his grandfather was. I met him on the 26th of January, which is a day of mourning for many Aboriginal people. And I said, look, do you mind if I take a photo? And he was so gracious and so beautiful and so joyous. And I said, I'm so sorry about everything that's happened to you. And he said, it doesn't matter. If I can tell you my story, I will talk to anyone on the planet, because if they hear my story, then they will know what life is about. And this is a position from where I come from, but I will tell my grandchildren or my grandnieces and nephews these stories, and they'll learn from that. So, in fact, I actually think that the storytelling and the knowledge is getting stronger and stronger and stronger. Plus, now we've got the benefit of, advanced technologies to map a lot of things, and, like we know where seeds germinate best and how to replace things. And, a mixture of these two things, makes it a very enlightened and energetic culture to learn from. So no, I don't think that there's any kind of fading. My very dear friend Barbara McGrady would say we are still here, and that means that her Aboriginal people have survived millennia, and then white colonisation came along and tried very hard to wipe white Aboriginal people and all of their understanding out, and they haven't done it. So it's actually growing. There's a lot more people that are on board with the idea that, this is a Aboriginal country, and to understand it properly and understand the way that it works, you must have Aboriginal knowledge. And so, all of that stuff that was hidden, because you do know that, Aboriginal languages were forbidden to be spoken. It was all part of the deculturalisation of Aboriginal people and the imposition of colonial rule. And they did, the British royal family are right at the very beginning of all of this, and they've done it all over the world. So I think it's actually a really interesting time to talk about these issues, because a lot of people don't really understand why Aboriginal people aren't overwhelmed with the fact that the monarchy is still our head of state, because at the very beginning they were living in paradise, and along came Captain Cook and put a flag in and took over the entire country and imposed colonial rule in the name of the monarchy. So while Aboriginal people are not disrespectful about the late Queen passing, they don't want the monarchy to be a part of the future of this country. And I understand that. So, a lot of people, I think, are going, Aboriginal people are protesting against the monarchy, how disrespectful. They're not disrespecting the late Queen. They realised she was an important figure, and she was also, to a lot of people, she was a loved one. So they respect that, but they don't respect the rule of the monarchy, if you like. So, just thought I'd clear that one up. There's a lot of stuff going around at the moment about, there's been a young Indigenous footballer that has been banned or just is not able to play a football match because something she put up on social media, and it was kind of like, why isn't she allowed to express her views? Just because we're still living with this anachronistic kind of system. Anyway.
What did she post, that Aboriginal player?
I don't know. I really don't know. Unless she's, and look, a lot of people, there was some guy in the crowd in Edinburgh or England that basically, called Andrew a sick old man, Prince Andrew a sick old man, because he's been associated with one of the greatest pedophiles in history, and that's been busted. And basically, even in England, there's people going, we're not really all that concerned with this. So why this girl has been banned from a football match, I think has a lot more to do with the perception that, she's an Aboriginal person and we've got to shut her down because she's dangerous. Because, there's a lot of very interesting things happening at the moment regarding how people are perceiving various things. And it does come back down to, this is a colonial country. Its rightful owners have been abused and, incarcerated and, impoverished and isolated from their culture and basically denigrated. And, it's something that Australia needs to come to terms with, because that's the truth. We need it, the fact that they closed this girl down sort of just steps right into that whole thing. You can't say a word against the colonial structures that we have, because if you do, you're a traitor. And if you're an Aboriginal person, you never asked for that colonial structure in the first place. So,
I recently did this road trip to Broken Hill, and on the way I was able to visit Munga National Park and Murruwinchi National Park on the way back. And this was a few months ago, and I think literally the day I arrived at Munga National Park, they were telling me how I think a few days afterwards they were reburying the Munga man and Munga woman, how it was being returned back to the land. I think previously it might have been held at a museum or something, but it was cool to see that slowly things are starting to get returned to the native land owners.
In terms of repatriation, you think about it. Okay, so if your grandmother's body was taken out of its burial spot and put in a museum, how would you feel? Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah, you would hate that, right? I mean, if you're... And so this is, again, what people don't understand. It's kind of like the colonialist regime went through and dug up people's graves all over the world. It wasn't just here, but it was particularly poignant here, and put them in museums. So, of course you're going to fight to get it repatriated. I mean, and also put where you want to put it, not where someone else wants you to put it, like where it's meaningful for you. I mean, it's a really simple concept. I mean, I think what's happened a lot in terms of, the bureaucracy and people's perceptions is that they've gone, this is an alien race. Aboriginal people are alien to us because, where we're in fact the aliens, or the white fellas were the aliens that came in, but they were the aliens, and because they were living a really paradisical life in a lot of ways. I mean, it was just beautiful. You wake up, you go down, you wash yourself, you eat some food, you go hunting, hang around, tell stories, make some art, do some music. Sounds pretty good to me. I mean, do we need all of the rest of the crap around us? Because colonial England and colonial Europe believed that their way of life was better. That's that imposition, and therefore the idea that we are superior, and therefore we're going to study you because, you're obviously less than we are. And it's kind of, all of those things put together have made what has happened here happen. And luckily, I hope people are actually realising that, where we've driven the planet is not necessarily a good space. And, we really need to be looking far more at the whole human race rather than going, I want to study you, or I want to study this, or I want to actually learn from people that have bigger, greater knowledge than I do, so...
I was quite impressed that, because my parents are from Vietnam and I was born in Australia, I was quite impressed with the school system, how, from kindergarten, year 1, year 2, year 3, we were taught straight away about how England, Australia, the white people came in, took over the country, drove all these sort of Aboriginals out, killed them, tried to married them, tried to sort of, marry them out. So I was quite impressed with the school system and how it really didn't really try to hide the truth, and they were quite sort of raw with the sort of past of Australia. And that's like how I always had empathy for the Aboriginals, and I never felt they were alienated. Yeah,
that's only fairly recent. It's probably only in the last 25, 30 years that you'd even get that. I mean, and it's always shocking to me that even so, there's still a great deal of racism that occurs. And, again, it's those finer points, like No, Aboriginal people are not disrespectful of the Queen. They just don't want to be. They want their sovereignty, their own kings and queens back, to run the country. They don't want, they don't want any of this system on top of them, like it's, and things like, the 26th of January emphasise that colonial input when, essentially, if you look at Macquarie, who was one of the Governor-Generals here, or not Governor-Generals, he was a governor.
What's on the 26th of Jan? What's this, like, what happened on that day?
Australia Day. That's Australia Day. It's the day that Captain Phillip rolled into Sydney Harbour and declared that Australia belonged to the Crown.
Got it.
So, I mean, Captain Cook came 17 years earlier. Phillip showed up with 7 boats of convicts. So Captain Cook had claimed Australia at that point. It's when they also started the notion of terra nullius, that there was no one here, so therefore they could actually walk in and just claim the land because no one owned it. So terra nullius means no one owns the land. And we know that that's wrong. So the 26th of January is Australia Day. I don't see it as a day that unites Australia because my Aboriginal friends call it a day of mourning because that's when, this process began. The thing is that, again, my Aboriginal friends do not hold anything against me personally. They know I'm an ally, but it's also, I understand where I am within all of this scenario as well. So, the idea is that we're here, so let's share, and that's very much Aboriginal culture. And it's also the culture of, Vietnamese people and sort of Indonesian people and Native First Nations American people and South African people. Do you know what I mean? So many people around the world don't really, the whole understanding of how we deal with society is, it's sort of still mounted on this idea that you have a bunch of people at the top that own all the wealth and they control everything else. And, that's not how a lot of cultures work. I mean, Vietnamese culture, for instance, is really beautiful, and you will sit at a table and everyone will share a meal together, and you'll share culture and you'll share stories. And for instance, Dai Li, who I've got a great deal of affection for, who's now in Parliament as an independent, representing the people of Western Sydney, and her background, I don't know whether you saw it, but she was wearing a traditional Thai dress and it had been printed with the Australian flag. Wow. It was actually really beautiful.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, so, but it was the Thai, because those, not Thai, sorry, Vietnamese dress. She's not Thai, she's Vietnamese. And she came in as a refugee, and she had this beautiful, and the girls are so beautiful and those dresses are so gorgeous. And it was just, yeah. And it was a really nice kind of understanding of where she came from as well. And so her culture is still there, but, she's proudly Australian. So I really believe that what we can do that makes this country so very special is that acknowledgement of where people come from and understanding of their cultures, going, okay, radio, but this is where we are now. So can we not sort of mix it up and, have a cup Murray with Vietnamese influences? Do you know what I mean? So Vietnamese food has been influenced by the French, and it's great. And so then the Vietnamese food out here is different. And, a cup Murray is a typical sort of Aboriginal cook-up, so it's like everything's in earth ovens, and like food and culture, and that influences the way that we think, it really does. And I think that we have potential in this country to be, one of the most generous, spirited and happiest places on earth, given that we don't divide,
It really reminds me of, so I was born on 30th of April And on the 30th of April was the day where the North Vietnam won the war against South Vietnam, and they took over and the Americans left, and basically sort of communism took over. And till this day on the 30th of April, they sort of celebrate it as like a day of, you know, winning, a day of uniting the whole country. But obviously the South Vietnamese people find it a very sad day. It's a day they've lost, and the Australian Vietnamese definitely feel the exact same way, because they were driven out of the country and they were forced to become refugees and come to Australia. So that definitely reminds me of that when you're talking about Australia Day.
I didn't realise that. Was that the day that Saigon fell?
Yes.
The Fall of Saigon. Yeah, well, you know, of course. I mean, you know.
And they try to celebrate it. It's like a public holiday. It's a public holiday for them. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, you know, like the Fall of Saigon was terrible. I mean, you know, it meant a lot of heartbreak to so many people. And I mean, you know, I'm sure, you know, your parents, you know, lost so many loved ones, and you know, like that's what I don't understand is that, I mean, one of the great things that we have about this country is people have come here to have a better life. And right from the start, when they sent the convicts out here, I mean, you know, they were mainly Irish, poor Irish convicts, and you know, some of them were political prisoners and all the rest of it. And ultimately, that became the backbone of the country, but there was still this overlay of, you know, the people that brought them out, who were basically pretty brutal, you know, English upper class twats. And, you know, like that divide can actually become much less, you know, into the future, I think, you know. So I'd like to see Australia become a republic, while we all have an affection for the royal family in the sense that, you know, they are a good, nice soap opera to watch. I mean, you know, why should they have anything to do with, you know, the head of, who's now King Charles III, the head of state is just a symbolic position. But it's not, because he actually has the power to sack our government. You know, so he can stand in and go, well, I don't like that government or what they're doing, I'm just going to sack it. And, you know, it's been proven that Gough Whitlam was sacked by, you know, the Governor-General, who's the Queen or the King's emissary in Australia. So, no, I don't think that we should be in that position. And, you know, your parents feeling that loss on the 30th of April every year, I mean, you know, that's a big thing. And, I mean, I don't know how many people in this country actually realise that either. I mean, I've worked with a lot of different culturally and linguistically diverse populations. I mean, I've worked with people from South Sudan and, you know, the Hazara mob, and the Hazara particularly understand Aboriginal people because the same thing has happened to them. They're Indigenous to their country and they got driven out by the Taliban. You know, the world over, people are fighting for supremacy all of the time. And I mean, it's human nature to be greedy, I guess, but we don't need to be that greedy. We have enough, you know, and it's easy to share it. I know I sound like a middle-aged hippie here, but, you know, it's actually much more of a cultural thing to grasp, I think, than, I mean, who wants to live in America? How horrible is that?
Now, what's your thoughts on how everything's sort of cyclic? Like, over a time span of like 1,000,000 years, like we're going to get taken over. America's going to get taken. England's going to take over. And it's this constant, you know, the person that previously was taken over, they've probably taken over what was previously there, and it's a constant cycle.
Well, I don't agree with that, actually, because, you know, there's a very famous comedian who did Fear of the Brown Planet. And the idea is that, you know, those cultural boundaries, you know, and it's very obvious in Australia. I mean, you know, like in the old days, you know, there was the Aryan race. Let's face it, that's what Hitler came up with, was to keep culture culturally pure. And ultimately, I mean, everyone's got partners from every part of the world in this country. And, the kids are all sort of, everyone's got various different backgrounds. So ultimately, the idea for me, or what I believe could happen if we push it in the right way, is that we will actually have the only thing that will keep a national boundary or a nationalistic ideal is the corporate state, because it's about, if you've got one group here and one group there and they're fighting against one another, you can produce a lot of stuff in that, but if you've got everyone agreeing with everyone, it's not as financially profitable for people. So say if you've got 20 people sitting in a room and they're using one light bulb, and in another room you've got one person and they're using one light bulb, who's making more money for the company? One person, right?
Yeah.
Because he's using all the energy from one light bulb, whereas 20 people are sharing it. The corporations don't want people to be big tribal organisations. They don't want people to get along, because the more divided we are, the more money they make. So, that's my theory and I'm sticking to it. But, so to me, with the breakdown of, with people marrying different ethnic groups, like a Vietnamese guy marrying an Indian woman, or a Caucasian woman marrying an Aboriginal man, like the children have basically got brown skin and, mixed cultural backgrounds. So, ultimately everyone's going to be, so skin colour won't be so much of a defining nationalistic boundary. Do you know what I mean? Everyone's going to sort of be a mixture. And it's funny, I was watching something on TV the other night about people's DNA, and this guy had been adopted into a family in London, and he just assumed that his background was Afro-English. Anyway, they chased his DNA down, and it turns out that he wasn't from a lot of the traditional areas that were scooped up for slaves. He was actually from the Seychelles, so he had Indian background. And, no one could really tell where he was from by looking at him, because, so do you know what I mean? So ultimately, I think all of these barriers will really start breaking down, and a lot more in the sort of next 20 years. So no one's going to know where anyone comes from unless they say, oh, look, my cultural background is Vietnamese, or my cultural background is Danish, or my cultural background is Gamilaroi, or whatever. Do you know what I mean? So I don't think anyone will try and, so then it's not a matter of, one nation taking over another nation. Well, at least that's what I hope anyway.
That's awesome. Yeah, you're right. I do think that in a million years' time, everyone's going to be the same skin color. There's going to be just so much mixing. Everyone's going to be beige. Everyone will be traveling the world, because traveling will be accessible. So no longer would you have dark skin because you're near the equator, or will you be really pale because you're near the North and South Poles, because you're just traveling everywhere. So everyone's going to be the same. And on top of that, I was thinking about mixed children are really beautiful. And if natural selection occurred, mixed people would get more they'll easily get married and have children. So it's just going to get more and more mixed. And you can already see it with the language of being English, the English language. Everyone's going to have the same language, and everything will become the same.
Well, not the same, because I think that we all will go, you know what, I come from this culture and this is my traditional meal, or this is the way that I see the world, or, but I think that there's an opportunity for more understanding of one another as human beings. I mean, look, as human beings, there's some universal truths, okay? We all need water. We all need some form of shelter. We all need some form of food. We have to dispose of our waste. Most of us we want to be born and live a life and then pass away, and that's how the universal truths of humanity. I think that anyone that worships the idea of, and a lot of this comes down to, religious belief as well, and, worshipping a powerful entity that's above you sort of leads you into this idea that worshipping the royal family, and remember they were given the divine right of gods, and then it becomes worshipping the head of a company. And none of these things to me sort of really make a lot of sense, because it's kind of like, why would I could admire and I could respect various people that have given something that, might be useful to humanity or whatever, but I don't admire or respect someone that's going to be, a company that's, say, using sort of Indigenous labour in Africa, where, they're digging out coltan, which is the main component of computer chips. And half of that's got a lot to do with the Congolese divisions, where, there's 4 major companies in there that basically it's in their interest to keep everyone fighting while they extract all of these minerals out of the ground and make a small fortune. It's not going back into those populations there. East Timor also is another one, and I've spent time in East Timor. There's Jose Ramos Horta is basically saying, look, we need to renegotiate all of these Timor Sea oil licenses, because Australia went in and said, well, we'll give you a hand freeing you from the Indonesians, but they basically carved up a lot of what was going on in the East Timor Sea, in the Timor Seas. And so, East Timor is not benefiting from that. And they should be. It's their, territorial waters. Stuff where, let's keep people fighting with one another while we, rip in and grab all of the resources. I mean, all of that is still happening, and all of that needs to be addressed.
I was recently at New Caledonia, and I was talking to all the local Kanak people, the native Kanak people, and I was learning how, I was so shocked how everything was so expensive in New Caledonia. It was $5 for a croissant. It was $200 a night for a motel that was not that even good. And I was like, it's so expensive. How can the local people afford? And they just can't. They can't live in the city. They're usually driven out. So in the city, majority of the people are just white, French, European people, and they're sort of forced to live in the countryside. And luckily, they have a lot of sort of land where you can't really touch it. It's the Kanak people only, and people can't buy the land. They can't sell it to white people. So that's a good thing. But yeah, they can't afford to live in the city. They can't afford the everyday goods. They literally just still go hunting, they fish, they spearfish, they live off the land. If someone in the tribe kills a deer, that's for the whole tribe, and that's food for them for the whole week, and they just share everything. But it was crazy how they are literally driven out of the city, and things are purposely expensive.
Have you spent much time in places like, Alice Springs or around Uluru? It's a similar story.
Yeah, I was in Uluru a few years ago. So beautiful. I was going to ask about how it just feels really spiritual. There's this weird spiritual energy there, but...
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the same thing. I mean, Uluru is a great spirit. I mean, and for the Aranda people, getting the walk on the rock closed down was just massively important, because also one of the things is that when you're on someone's country, they're responsible for your welfare. So, that rock walk, which I could never really understand why anyone would want to walk up it, because, I mean, while it was well known to upset the Aranda people, why would you do it? It's like just going, stuff you, basically. And I just, if someone says, please don't do that, do you go ahead and do stuff? I mean...
Yeah, I think I'm a bit more ignorant. I think it was, a few years back, 3 years ago, I did visit Uluru and I climbed the thing, and now I know it's not good. But I did climb it out of ignorance. So I want to put it out there. I wouldn't do it again.
But that's exactly what I mean about ascribing to a mentality that's been overlaid on this country. That's exactly an example of it, because out of ignorance, you didn't know. And of course, you're a really sensitive person with a very curious mind. So if you did know, of course you wouldn't do it. And, you know, it's sadly, I've always known. So, but I've walked around the base in the areas that I knew that I was welcome to do that. And yeah, Uluru is, it's a huge, it's quite overwhelming, actually. It is quite overwhelming. But, you know, the people in Mutijulu who live on the opposite side from all of the tourist stuff, you know what they used to do? I don't think they're doing it as much now, but, this is what I was told, is that the resort used to leave food and water out on the road for the people from Mutijulu, just so that they wouldn't come into the resort looking for food and water. Wow. You know, so we're talking, you know, there's, you know, again, it's that overlay of you know, down here, Kosciuszko National Park, while there's disputes about who's who in the zoo and whatnot, they haven't really set up anything. They have a huge building down here in Jindabyne, and there is like a couple of, like 2 display cases there that actually even mention Aboriginal people. So while this has been one of the busiest winters I have ever seen, all of the people that have come down here have no idea that it's Ngarigo country. They have no idea about anything to do with the fact that this is an Aboriginal country. And the ignorance is still so deep that I taught a photographic workshop down here, and one of the guys, in all genuine, you know, naivety, said to me, and this is when my friend, Ngarigo friend Michelle, was standing right next to me, he turned around and said, "Oh, there's no Ngarigo people here." Like, while she's standing next to me.
Yeah, that's so unfortunate, ignorant, yeah.
And it was just like, oh, and he said, no, they're all extinct, or, you know, and I said, no, lots of them live down on the coast now. And he said, well, why aren't they back here? And it's like, you take something away from people, you take everything that they've got away from someone, and then you turn around where they've got less than zero, and then you turn around and expect them to come into an environment where, you know, no one can afford to live. It's just like, how do people not understand it? You know, like, it really. Anyway, so that was quite interesting as well. You know, so when you look at the way that, you know, we have evolved as people, there is a lot of willful ignorance in this world. You know, people don't wish to find out about other people. You know, they don't want to, you know, they want their little nice, secure environments that they don't want. Like your parents, I'm sure, as refugees, have really seen a lot of stuff, and they've probably quite traumatized by that stuff as well. And, you know, for them to come into a society like this that probably, you know, when they came in was probably not particularly willing to accept them as, you know, they've fought really hard for what they've got. And I'm sure that they're incredibly grateful, and as a result are probably very compassionate as well, because they would recognise that same trauma in other people, you know. And I think that that's, to me, you know, one of the greatnesses of this country is that your parents have probably worked there, you know, whatever off to give you a really good life, so that you can sit here and, you know, you're obviously a hard worker too, but you can sit here and talk to a whole variety of people with that understanding and compassion. And, you know, curiosity as well. So, you know, yeah, we have a lot to really respect and really be grateful for the contribution of people like yourself, like Daly, you know, like, you know, all of the Aboriginal elders that I can mention, you know, like Uncle Jack, Uncle Archie, you know, Barbara McGrady, Gummeroy Newman, you know, like all of these people, I mean, and so many more. I mean, I've got lists and lists and lists, you know, people from the Sudanese community, people from the Congolese community, people from the Irish community, you know, there's so many different, and the Italians and Greeks, let's not forget them, because without Italians, we would never have had decent coffee in this country.
Lisa, where did you get this sort of curiosity to, where did this curiosity come from? Your curiosity to want to learn about all these different cultures, want to sit down and listen to their story, know about how, you know, there was, you know, the French used to colonize Vietnam, and have this vast sort of encyclopedia that you have.
I come from a family of know-it-alls. No, my father was a journalist. My grandfather was a journalist. So my grandfather was a journalist. My father was a journalist. My aunt was a journalist. My brother is a journalist, and I'm a photojournalist. So I think, you know, everything that comes in front of my camera, like a lot of people say photography is a passion. For me, it's a conduit to life, you know, like when you put a camera out there, it's like, to me, it's the connection to people. I mean, I can feel through my camera what they're feeling, you know, and sometimes it's been greatly joyous and sometimes it's been really horrible as well, you know, like, you know, photographing people that have just lost their houses in bushfires, or, you know, that's pretty harsh. But, or someone that's just won a sporting achievement, a race or something like that. You kind of get this connection with people, and you can feel those feelings really clearly. And when you feel those feelings, you want to know about how you got to that point, you know. So then you go and do your research and, you know, you look back into, okay, so why would your parents, for instance, have left Vietnam? Is because, you know, they were living in South Vietnam and it was threatened by a different ideology. They were going to be potentially murdered if they stayed there. So, you know, then you go, oh, wow, why would anyone leave their country if they weren't being threatened? And, you know, then you see people from everywhere in the world that have come here that have, you know, ended up here because, you know, they were going to get killed if they'd stayed where they were. So then you look into the politics behind it and you look into what the historic issues were or the political ideologies, or whether it was a corporate issue or any of those things, to find out about that person that's standing in front of a camera. And the reason that you do that is because they've given you something by standing in front of your camera. They've given you how they feel. So for me, I have to give back. I mean, you know, it's the exchange. It's the photographic exchange. It's a really big part of photojournalism to have I think it was Henri Cartier-Bresson said, and they consider him like the granddaddy of photojournalism. He said that you had to have as much respect for the person in front of the camera as you do for the person behind the camera. And that, to me, is an enormous part of the transaction of being a photographer. I need to know a lot about your background to do you justice, you know, and you've given me how you feel, so I need to do you justice, which kind of takes me into what I'm doing at the moment, which is doing this master's on my friend Barbara McGrady's work, because we've discussed long and hard how people view things through the camera, and because she is a Gumare Yina, which means a Gimilari woman, she sees the world quite differently to me because of our backgrounds, but we see it quite similarly in a lot of ways too. So there's this, this thing about photojournalism connects you with humanity, and that's why I've become a Wikipedia about so many different things, because to understand someone, I think that you need to understand where they came from.
It reminds me of it. I used to do art in high school, and the one day the teacher just printed out this massive photo, and I think it was like one of the Time magazine sort of cover photos, and it was a photo of that Middle Eastern lady with the scarf and the really green eyes, and her skin was, you can see she was dirty, and it was one of those, I think that photo just blew up, and something about that photo where you can sort of see everything. With that one photo, you can see her, where she came from, the hardship that she's gone through. You can see everything just through her eyes, and it was just one photo, and it was so impactful.
That was Steve McCurry's Afghan Girl.
Yes.
I also have an encyclopedic knowledge about photography. That's really an interesting photo because, it was stunning. It's a beautiful portrait. It really, truly is. Jodie, oh God, they tracked her down.
Yes.
And they found that little girl, and they they did a second front cover with her on it. And Jodie, God, I've forgotten the second name. I'll have to look it up.
I remember I was watching a video how they tracked her down, and she was seeking asylum, and she because of that photo, I guess politicians in these Middle Eastern countries don't really like her, the ones that don't like free movement, and how that photo changed things for her, and you can see how she's aged and she still has the same eyes, but there's so much more wisdom and so much more. You can see she's been through a lot more and seen a lot more worse things over the last decade since that first photo.
I think it's Jodie Biber actually, is the one that did that. Yeah, it was Jodie Biber. And yes, she won. She's from South Africa. So the woman that did the follow-up photo. And there was a lot of controversy about it because, they went back and it was kind of like, well, this photo of you didn't change the situation at all. And I think with all photojournalists, we all hope that, with our photos that we can change the following history. And that comes from James Nachtwey, who's also a Time cover photographer, basically made a very famous statement about, I've come to bear witness so that this never happens again. So, I think with every photojournalist, we all believe that when we point a camera in a certain direction, that, hopefully, whatever it is that we've got in front of our camera, if it's a horrible thing, taking a photo of it and showing it to the world, that we'd be able to change those circumstances. But it doesn't always happen like that. I've had 2 front covers for Time magazine, and one was of the apology, the Australian government's apology to the stolen generations. And for me, that was one of the most important things that I've ever done, because after I'd worked on that story for nearly 10 years before I got the Time front cover. And, but after that, the acknowledgement of the government, I do know that the Canadians actually apologised to their First Nations 6 months after that, because, the cover went worldwide. So, whether it's like it was just at the peak of something that was going to happen anyway or whatever, but I think photos can actually be an indicator that, look at this and look at where we're sitting and look at where we can head from this point. So they can really, basically, they can really sort of bring things to a head, or amalgamate, or
That little push.
converge a lot of ways of thinking and give it that little push and send it through, So things can change as well. But, yeah, the Afghan Girl shot by Steve McCurry, it is a classic, but, and it did bring a lot of attention to the Afghan situation, but sadly, there's a colleague of mine, Andrew Quilty, who's just released a book, and unfortunately he was actually on Q&A the other night and I missed it. He's lived a lot of the last 10 years in Afghanistan, and he's been documenting the daily life of the Afghan people. And, by showing people as human beings, and getting an understanding of, who they are, this is one of the things that photojournalism can really help with. So, and then there's been a number of, Steve DuPont is the other Australian photojournalist that's worked in Afghanistan as well. I was in East Timor and I've worked, with, the mob for a lot of years. So there are things that definitely, the more imagery you put out there of a group of people looking dignified and going about their daily lives, it demystifies people. It makes them less of an enemy, So I think photojournalism really does open people's eyes in a lot of ways. Whether there's change as a result of that is not always the case. So, it's an important thing though, I think.
I think there was like a few other images that come to mind, like the photos of the monks. I don't know which country, but they would burn themselves in fire as like a way to bring message. So that was one impactful image that I think of. And another impactful image is, maybe it was in China, like the protesters standing in front of the tanks. So like images like that.
Square.
Yeah, so I think you're right. These images had reached a lot of people, but it didn't really change the situation. But I think the fact that people like me know about it, we have that sort of notion on what's going on, it still made an impact in that sense, where people know, and whether the change hasn't changed now, but eventually it would accumulate. Like that is one piece to then accumulate to the thing that finally does push it over the tipping point.
Well, I think, of course, one of the most famous images of all, and this relates very closely to you, is Nick Ut's photo of the little girl running down the road who'd just been napalmed, basically. And she was naked and she was on fire, and Nick Ut took the photo and then grabbed her and, put clothes around her. And he actually looked after her for a lot of years. And very recently, she came out with a statement about that photo because she resented it for a lot of her growing up years, mainly because, she thought that it was very invasive. And but then she's come to respect what actually happened. Hang on. And Nick Ut was actually Vietnamese American. So,
let me find the image as well. I haven't seen this photo. Napalm. Is this the image? Let me share my...
Napalm Girl. Yeah, her name is Phan T Kim Phuc. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, wow. That's it. That one. I know. It's horrifying, isn't it?
So skinny, yeah.
It just makes me cry.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because her name is Kim Phuc. Yeah. And he rescued her, but look at her back. There's photos there of her back. She was on fire. I mean, it makes me cry, that photo.
Yeah.
She was burnt with napalm. And that was called the photo of the decade. You can see that there's photos of her there with her back on, her back on fire. She'd just been napalmed, So she's one hell of a lady, but she did resent that photo for a lot of years. But, in a lot of ways, it also changed the course of the Vietnam War because it drew so much press, and, there was a little girl running down the street, who'd just been naked and just, like in such pain, like it's a terrible photo. It really is. But they called it the photo of the decade. I would have to put it down as one of the most famous photos in the world, and certainly it did have an impact on the way that people then viewed the Vietnam War. So, photojournalism as an insight into humanity is really, it's important. Look, there's a lot of debate, like, for instance, showing an image of a, young girl naked like that. I mean, is that the right thing to do? I mean, the debate now revolves around, whether images are exploitative or whether they're something that actually assists the way that we move forward. I think that the photographer's intention is always going to be the most important thing. Like I said, when I connect with a subject, they give me something. So I have to respect them and give them something back. That's just, so whether that's a dignity or whether that's the idea that by photographing them, something can change for the better in their lives. I mean, I think that that's my intention. On my website, I say something like that, but I can't quote it off the top of my head. But I think that sort of transaction between that person in situations where, they're in the middle of a newsworthy incident, you don't stop to ask permission because you can't. Normally if you're just walking around the street and you're taking photos, I take photos, then I go and approach the people afterwards and say, look, I've taken photos of you. Are you okay with that? Blah, 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 blah. And most good photojournalists will actually do that. In a news incident where something has blown up or whatever, and you're dealing with the fallout of that situation, you're just taking photos as a matter of record. And then, if you can find those people again afterwards and say, like, is this okay? That's great. But if you can't, do you draw the line about what is, a truthful document of the incident, or do you self-censor, or all of these things? So there's a lot that runs through your mind when you're doing all of this automatically, So yeah, it can be a really tough call when you're working on news. I'm probably not doing as much news now because, due to the pandemic, I mean, I've ended up sort of being out in the country for the last couple of years, and, I'm getting a bit older, and so I'm tending to work on much more local issues. So it's a little bit different. It's a lot slower. I'm not traveling as much,
When back in the days, did you have urges to travel to where the trouble was? Like, let's say you were 20 years younger, would you be in Ukraine right now taking photos and figuring things out, or be in Afghanistan? Is that like an urge that journalists have?
Yes. Yeah. I was on the way to Afghanistan when my mum passed away, so I didn't end up going there. But yeah, a couple of people have sort of said to me, I was muttering about the Ukraine, and they were like, oh, no, you can't go now, Lisa. And I was like, yeah, probably not. But yeah, I think if 20 years ago, for sure, I would definitely have gone, I think that it's also difficult now because, the way that the editorial runs is that, we used to get commissioned to go to places, or we'd go there and then sell our photos. But it's actually a lot harder job nowadays because, there's photographers everywhere, and editorial has been devalued enormously. So, to pack up and go somewhere like Afghanistan without any security, of being able to be pulled out of, kidnapped situations, for instance, and they're really the big one, is where you go and you get kidnapped and you've got to have some company that will bargain for your life. Kidnap insurance was a big thing for a while. But most of the time when you went somewhere, you would be going with under the aegis of a company. And, that's increasingly eroded to the point now where, it's very hard to go anywhere with, any kind of security at all. So, you want that security. You want, you don't want to go somewhere and get killed, basically, So, I don't know about the Ukraine. I mean, the Ukraine sounds really different, though. It seems like a much more typical European-style war, but where you've got a front line and you've got these people there. And in Bosnia, for instance, when they started employing snipers, that was really, and I was quite close to going there, but the thing is that there were 27 freelance photojournalists that were killed within like a 12-month period. And the reason for that was because they were going in there to take photos of this war and they were getting cleaned up by snipers. That's not currently happening in the Ukraine that I'm aware of. They're just bomb blasting one another. The big areas of real danger were places like Afghanistan, when you would have guerrillas just letting off bombs. And I think Steve DuPont got called up in a bomb blast, and while he was out with the video crew, and it's not pretty. You can get killed pretty easy. I think that there's areas that were more dangerous than others, and I think Ukraine, I would definitely have gone to Ukraine. So, and I think also the other one that I would have covered would have been a lot of the big waves of immigration coming across into Europe. But, there was no way that I could get there and actually get paid. So
I was like fascinated watching movies like Life of Walter Mitty, and there was this recent movie where I forgot the name of the director, but they sort of show this whole like the world of being a journalist, and it's this whole world that there's like, and I was looking at these old movies, and back in the days it was super cool. It was amazing how you'd go around and how the printing press and like it was so fascinating just watching that today. But I can definitely sense that times are changing, and it's like I don't even know if the magazines are still making as much money as they used to back in the days, because now content is like sort of decentralized, and can they still afford to send people to fly over? And you mentioned they don't do that now. It's like a bidding war type of thing where it's like people have to pitch them ideas, and they're no longer hiring amazing talent to go out, and now they just filter through what comes to them, and the whole system is different.
Yeah, completely. I mean, this is to do with the democratization of media, which is social media, the fact that everyone's got a camera in their phone, whether or not great talent arises out of that. I mean, to me, there's a sea of really bad images that just wallpaper out there. So the decentralization of, it's actually really interesting because I just read a journal about Life magazine and their coverage of Africa and how they use that coverage to enforce the industrial capital state, if you like. But everything in the days of life, they use that as a conduit into looking into other places and other people's cultures, how those messages were, and they were often written in very racial terms. The photography itself wasn't necessarily racist, but the commentary that went alongside of it was often very racist. This paper that I just read was about the idea that Life used this to absolutely concrete the way of living of America. So it was more or less a propaganda thing. But they also used some amazing photographic talent. Now everyone has a say, everyone has an opinion, everyone has, you can be a social media god and have like 16 trillion followers, like the Kardashians, for instance, and they've monetized it. So basically what they're doing is that they're taking the place of the fashion magazine. They are themselves in control of the message and in control of the money and in control of the output, and they're individuals. So they're not organisations that are saying, this is an interesting event. They're just basically PR spokesmen for various different companies. And as a result, if Kim Kardashian expresses an opinion, which she's very careful not to most of the time, the world goes into meltdown, and it's like, she seems like to be a smart girl, and, I think she's got a law degree now and all the rest of it. But her rise to such, everyone knows who Kim Kardashian is. Her rise to that has been very much dictated to by the democratization of social media, because they put out a television show. She has zillions of followers who really essentially are just following her because she's a pretty girl and uses good makeup. Do you know what I mean? So anything she says, it's like that line out of The Life of Brian. I don't know. It's one of my favourite movies, and I just watched it again. You must watch Life of Brian. It's hilarious. It's the story of the boy who was born at exactly the same time as the Jesus Christ, right? And one of the lines in it is and this guy's called Brian, and he's got nothing to do with being Jesus Christ, nothing to do with religion whatsoever. But he runs at a parallel with, Jesus, who's a very serious and, very important figure. But he's just this ordinary guy. Yeah. But they mistake him for being Jesus because, he was born at the same time. And there's this one scene in it where he doesn't want to be, like anyone important or anything. And they chase him through, the desert because they think that he's actually, might be Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And then they all camp outside of his, his house, and he's just had, a girl over to stay. So he opens the window and sort of is completely naked, and there's like hundreds of thousands of his followers out the front, and they're all gone, Brian. And he's like, and his mother comes out and goes very classically, and they're all going, Messiah. And he's like, oh my God. And sorry, pardon the pun. And his mother comes out and goes, he's not the Messiah. He's a very naughty boy. And it's like, anyway, gets some clothes on and he comes out and he goes, they're all going, Brian, Messiah. And he's going, I'm not the Messiah. And they're all going, no, you are. And he's going, I'm not. And then they say, then he says to them, you are all individuals. And they all, 100,000 people go, we are all individuals.
Ironic.
And this one guy goes in the background, I'm not. And it's like this. It's a
layered.
Classic. It is so late. It's a wonderful, wonderful movie about how we have this need, to find our heroes or our followers or whatever. And by whatever means that we do that, it means that we're not really thinking for ourselves. And I think that, a lot of this conversation is really, about the state of humanity. And, my part in humanity is to be a photojournalist and take photos and try and put it out there, a different viewpoint, and maybe change will occur. I'm driven by that. That's what, is really important to me. And I think we're now at a point where people are realising the quality of photography, good photography as opposed to, and meaningful photography as to, being out there with a, camera in your phone where you can document everything, but it's not necessarily good stuff. I don't know, I mean, there's a lot going on in terms of media and how it's affecting the world. Whether it still has any sort of effect is another thing. But then you look at what happened in America with, Donald Trump, and the echo chamber of social media became a very evil scenario because, people took up arms against the Capitol and basically staged a military coup. So, in America, it's pretty unforgivable.
It's pretty cool how when I'm sort of on social media, like now as I'm starting to follow more journalists and photographers, like real photographers, how there's like a clear difference between images and stories. Like those iconic photos we're talking about, they literally tell 1,000 stories, whereas you go on social media, there's just a bunch of images that tell you nothing. And I think that's the difference between a sort of a hobbyist or someone that's just taking photos versus someone who's really passionate and someone who's really doing it as a career and as their passion in life.
Well, I mean, there's all sorts of different photographies, but, like the photographies that are informed, generally, photojournalism, you can obviously tell the difference. It's like, during the bushfires, Matt Abbott and Nick Moyer, two very, very fine photographers who's, I think both of them ended up with work in World Press. I think that Matt Abbott actually won a World Press Award for his coverage. I mean, it was incredibly, and I was actually here. It was just right before the pandemic. And I knew that there were bushfires coming. So, this is where my primary residence is. So I'd just come back from a job and literally was trying to get all the wood off the ground before the fires got to within 8 kilometres of here. So it was a whole different ballgame. I've covered a lot of bushfires, but to actually be in the path of one was like mind-boggling. And, those two photographers, the sophistication of their imagery during, such a huge event, like it's not going to compare with someone that's standing there with Johnny on the spot when you've got like a 300-foot wall of flame coming at you, yeah, sure. But just the sophistication of how they put their imagery together was amazing, and I mean, I think that, yeah, you should have a look at some of their stuff. I mean, it's really good. I mean, Australia has some of the finest photojournalists in the world. I think because we have a very good education system here, comparatively, people are actually able to learn a great deal about the rest of the world. So, you can, the depth of knowledge that people have translates to their photography. I mean, if you want to go out and photograph, say, Matt Newton does this, and he's doing a lot of environmental stuff, and he basically, is photographing these rare birds that they're protecting at the moment. And, he knows everything that there is to know about these birds because it gives him the depth of information that he needs that translates to the photos. So it's the same as what I was saying before about the conduit. I need to know everything I can so that I can understand the photo even better and make it more expressive and make it clearer that there is an actual story behind the image. And ultimately, photojournalism is the great visual storytelling. How we come to it and our perspective of it is, it has to be informed by knowledge or bias or cultural understanding or whatever. And those things are massively important.
Lisa, how many issues does Time magazine release a year?
They do, they've pared it back. So they're only doing, as far as I know, they're only releasing the American version now. I'm not 100% sure on that. 52, they do a weekly, they're a periodical, so a weekly periodical, yeah.
And the fact that you got 2 covers, that is insane. Like people dream, that's like a big thing, right? Tell me about that story. How did that come to be? Like the fact that you got 2, like when I think of photography and journalism, I think of Time and I think of the cover. And that's like an amazing achievement.
Yeah, it is one of my prouder boasts. I don't think Andrew Quilty's had a few, Steve Dupont's had a few. I think Matt Abbott might have had one. I'm not sure. So there's not many.
Yeah.
There's not many people that get it. Look, I mean, they recognise passion. I mean, like I'd followed the story of the stolen generations for 10 years. And I just said to them, look, I'm going to go and shoot it. So you can either commission me or not. And so they commissioned me, and that's how that one came about. And then the other one was a little bit different. It was like, it was kind of like, it was a special edition, and it was about Australian rivers. And they were thinking about, doing something on the Snowy River. And I said, well, hey, you got to give it to me, so they gave it to me, and then they gave me the front cover because I just said they had to. So, and it's a corker of a shot, really, because it's sort of, it's a friend of mine, Bruce Easton, walking across the top of the Snowy River, and you can see the river and it's all covered in snow and everything like that. And, it's the highest mountain and it's the highest river, and it's very iconic. So it was a bit of an iconic shot. But the other one was a portrait of a young Aboriginal girl being protected by another woman. And, like she was holding her so that it felt like, you couldn't take the little girl away. And that was, to me, that was one of my proudest stories ever, because that really made a difference. It made it, it went worldwide, and, it was about a very big, important moment in Australian history that the stolen generations were acknowledged. And, Uncle Jack Charles, who I also photographed, who's just passed away within the last week. I mean, he was part, and also Uncle Archie Roach, who I also photographed. Both of them were stolen generation. They both had terrible, beginnings where they were told all sorts of things about their families. They were these great creative artists. Uncle Jack was like a wonderful, light-filled being. He was so compassionate and generous and light and funny, and they'd done terrible things to him as a child. No one deserves what he went through. So, it's Australia's great shame. The reparations prior to the apology, really, no one was acknowledging things, and post the apology people were. So whether that magazine cover and story going worldwide contributed to the understanding that maybe the stolen generations were treated pretty poorly, I don't know, but I'd like to think so. I'd like to think that it contributed in some small way. So, yeah, I was pretty proud about that. But, yeah, I mean, basically they came about because I was really passionate about both stories, and I think that, if you're pitching to a magazine or a newspaper or whatever, and you can say, look, I know everything that there is to know about this and I want to do it, then they'll probably give you a run. And like I said, it's a lot harder now. I also, worked with The Guardian on a story about burial grounds just outside of Jindabyne that the council has given the go-ahead to be developed right next to, and they haven't done enough due diligence. And basically the developer, when I interviewed him and I said, have you done enough due diligence? And he went, the council has approved it. Go find something important to report on. Yeah. And, so building over a burial ground that could be, upwards of, 10 to 20,000 years old, to him wasn't important. It also went worldwide, that story, and Jindabyne is not a large town, and just the level of disrespect and the fact that this developer thought that, it was unimportant and that the story was unimportant, and, that I was unimportant by reporting the story was just astounding. I was just going, do you know what you've just said? And do you know how many people this story will actually eventually reach? So I was very passionate about that story as well. And so you've got to have, and it took a year to do. So it's hard. It's hard to get these things up, but you really got to fight for them. And if you believe in them, it's very important that you keep going with them.
Is it a possibility for you to have became a full-time sort of journalist with one of these big sort of news companies? Do they hire journalists full-time, or is everything commissioned freelancing work?
I think most photographers, a lot of the Sydney Morning Herald photographers have, there's a couple of things. You can go into it and get a full-time gig. A lot of people have hung around and gotten gigs. Then you can be what they call a stringer, which is someone that gets paid to do 2 or 3 regular shifts a week. Or a lot of people sort of, want to pursue their own projects too. So would rather work as freelancers because, then you can pick and choose your own stories a little bit more than when you're working full time for a company. Probably about 10 years ago, the newspapers and magazines started ridding themselves of their photographic departments entirely. So they sacked huge numbers of photographers, so most magazines and newspapers now don't have full-time staff, although they have a skeleton staff, but they won't have full-time staff, preferring to use stringers or freelancers when they need extra hands. But because of the pandemic, I'm not 100% sure of what anyone is really doing, because I kind of got trapped down here. So I've just pursued, local issues, and I've got a project that I just got a grant for called Seeing the Snowies, which is essentially a portrait project just documenting the local community as it was before the pandemic, because so many people have moved in from the city into this country area, and now has also contributed to higher rents. And, so a lot of the local people are actually struggling quite hard because, all the property prices have gone up, and, they can't afford the rents anymore, and they can't afford the food anymore because it's all been inflated. So there's a bit of that going on. So I'm doing a project about that. I'm just in the process of selling some stuff to the State Library, which is a lot to do with my archive and stuff like that. So I haven't really been commissioned to do anything freelance for news or editorial, really, because I was down here in the country and they're all going, well, what can anyone do? So I'm not really sure where people are at with their employment scenarios. It's a privileged position to be a photojournalist. And like I said, I don't know. I know Andrew Quilty has just released a book, but other than that, I'm not really sure what anyone's doing. I haven't really spoken to anyone for a while. Got to get back into it. But yeah, so the career path was quite defined earlier on, but now it's not,
Ask about that. Like, one of the questions, like, how would you survive as a journalist? Because it feels like it's getting worse and worse, where there's just becoming, everything is decentralized. Like, how can a magazine or news company make a return on like a $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 commission gig overseas, like for like a piece, for one story? Like, that one story is one in like 1,000 stories that they're releasing that week. And how can that one story be worth even $1,000 or $2,000? And if it's just like a numbers game, like, how are the journalists and photographers going to be able to make money if they're getting paid $50 for a photo? And then how can someone do it as like a full-time gig? Yeah.
Well, the thing is that if people subscribe to news online, or they get, there's not that many physical copies of newspapers and magazines left. A lot of mastheads only do digital delivery now. For instance, if you buy a subscription to the New York Times or the Sydney Morning Herald, that then enables, them to put money behind journalism and getting good stories and paying for everything and whatnot. There's a number of different people that are starting their own publishing things and whatnot, but you've got to have a subscription base, or like The Guardian, they have a trust base, but Also, they ask for donations all of the time. The Pulitzer Centre, the International Fund for Journalists, IFJ, is actually, they sponsor various different journalists around the world. If you go to them with a really good story, they'll say, yeah, we'll give you some money to pursue it. But it's really hard. I mean, it's journalism used to be a full-time paid career that you can make a living and have a life out of. And now it's a lot more difficult than that. And it's actually, a lot of journalists are working in PR. They don't really want senior journalists a lot of the time because they've got to pay them more. Lots of people are leaving various different organisations because, they get to a certain age and it's just like, I don't want to be doing this anymore because, you're working to ridiculous deadlines and stuff like that. So it's tough. It's a tough career at the moment. And I mean, as I see it, the future, that the web has to monetize itself eventually. There's always going to be a startup that does everything for free until they realize that they can't actually, without working 24/7, and getting some sponsorships and things like that, that they're going to be able to achieve, worldwide domination. And I mean, it's very hard. I mean, a lot of people work with curated content so that, if you're a fashion magazine and you're dealing with a specific sector of the population, you will then expect your contributors to contribute stuff for free. There's a really good Facebook site called Stop Working for Free. And it's hilarious. It really is because, there's always call outs on it. Like one call out was, we're a fintech company. Now, fintech company, right? And we're having a conference of, several hundred people and we want a volunteer photographer. And we'll pay for transport costs and you'll get lunch. Otherwise, that's it. So, someone posted it on Stop Working for Free and I posted underneath, hey, is this being held in Europe? They did say they'd cover transport costs. It won't cost them much to fly me from Australia. And, everyone's having a big laugh about it. But it's, these are the things that, unfortunately have really eroded. Everyone's a photographer. Everyone's got a camera and phone. Everyone thinks that they can write. So there's a lot of erosion of professional standards as well. Where people can help is by subscribing, like if you pay like $2 a month or something for a subscription to the New York Times, it will help them basically pay for proper journalism. Same with Sydney Morning Herald. News.com is always, news.com.au is free, but things like the Mirror and the Daily Mail runs on advertising. So if you go to the Daily Mail, all you will see is advertising. It's so distressing because you can't actually read a story on it. But the Sydney Morning Herald is a subscription base as well. A lot of the high-end newspapers now online are basically behind paywalls. To be informed is going to cost. That's all there is to it. And that's fair enough. Because there's a cost involved in getting the information as well. Lisa,
tell me about your passion for horses and skiing. That's something I've noticed from following you. You have a lot of photos of horses and you ski and you do it competitively, which is super crazy.
It's kind of like it's the private side of my life in a way. It's like, look, I'm really sporty. I've always been really sporty. I was very lucky. I was introduced to skiing when I was very young. Well, not very young, but when I was young. And I've always loved it. And I worked, when I was looking for things to do, when I left school, I worked around the world as a ski instructor so that I could travel. I had an elongated gap year, if you like. Then, of course, I went off and had a proper career. Basically, just in the last 2 years since I've been back down here, I've started ski training again, and I've competed all season, actually. And, out of 10 events, I won 4, came second in 3, I DNF'd in 3. So, so I was pretty happy with that. yeah, so there's I'm looking for sponsors because I don't know how I'm going to raise the money, but the World Championships are actually in 2024, at the beginning of 2024 in Italy, and I'd love to go to the World Championships. I mean, I'm now a Masters skier, but these would be the World Winter Masters Games. So the alpine section of it would be one component, and I'd imagine that there's going to be people on skates, and so it's the Winter Olympics for old people, basically, which I kind of like. So I'm looking for sponsors. So if there's anyone out there that wants to sponsor me skiing, look me up. And I can do some really great photos as well and write good pieces for you. But yeah, so I would really like to compete in that. I mean, I've got a lot on. I'm also doing, my master's in research, and that's about photojournalism. So I've got that going on at the moment as well. So there is a fair bit going on. But horses, I've always loved horses since I was a kid. I'm in the Snowy Mountains. The Snowy Mountains is famous for horses. I have currently a rescue horse and a riding horse. He's a little baby that was actually, Ernie was dumped here when he was a baby, and I've just kept him and broken him in, and now I ride him. But I've had a succession of rescue horses. I've had old geriatric horses that basically they come to me, they don't do anything, they sit around the paddock, they get fed a lot, patted a lot, lots of carrots. And that's my contribution back to, horses who get treated very, very badly generally in life. So I've got 3 buried out the front. I've got a new Alfie, he's my new rescue. Baba came to me as a 22-year-old, and I had to let him go when he was nearly 32 because he had arthritis and he really had reached the end of his life, and he just was a paddock decoration. But he was also one of the great loves of my life because he was a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful Andalusian, and he'd been treated appallingly. And, he had 10 good years of just hanging around being a paddock decoration and having a good time. So, so I do that because, they're beautiful creatures and people treat them really badly. And when they come to the end of their lives, they don't know what to do with them because it's like they deserve to have a life, they deserve to grow old and be looked after. So that's my little that's what I do in the background of all of the rest of everything that's going on.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, I'm very lucky. I'm lucky. I am lucky. Someone put something up about luck the other day, and I went, I have one thing that's always served me very well. I'm blonde, I'm blue-eyed, I've got white privilege in the sense that the world has always looked on white people as people that were superior, and as a result, regardless of how hard you work or whatever, you're going to have an advantage over someone else until we all turn brown, basically. And, that's a thing that, I'm really aware of. And that's why I want to use the good luck that I've had to help other people establish their own good luck. I mean, that's a really important part of my life, I think. It's lucky. I mean, there's an old phrase, there but for the grace of God go I. And, I've had so many near misses in my life where I could have ended up in all sorts of really terrible trouble, and I've always managed to be able to scrape through. My dad once said that I was like a cat with 9 lives, And I think that that's my second bit of really great luck, is that all of the really stupid things that I've done, all the bad choices I've made, all of the really difficult times, and everyone has difficult times. I mean, I've always managed to survive them and come out of them. And that's, luck number 2. Luck number 3, I think, is sometimes you're just in the right place at the right time. And, you're open to receiving and giving from whatever it is that you get. So I think that I have 3 very important pieces of luck, and I'm very, 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 very grateful for them, because, you know, they make up who I am. And if I can share that good luck and share that confidence that I have that the universe will always provide, and share what I have as well, then that makes me, you know, lucky to a huge extreme. So yeah.
Lisa, I was trying to think, like, as you're talking about sort of getting sponsorships and sort of getting commissioned work, like, yeah, it's like tough, like even with social media, like trying to monetize social media would be so difficult because there's just so many other people taking photos and doing the exact same thing. But I think what makes you stand out differently is you have you ever thought about becoming like a teacher, like teaching people online how to take photos, how to be a journalist, how to write. Like, I think if you niche down to something like that, yes, the audience reach is going to be much smaller, but you're going to attract people that have the resources to be like, hey, can I get coaching from you, Lisa? Can I learn how to write? Like, I think that would be a smart approach, really niching down into what you're really good at, rather than just trying to go broad and just take photos and have people notice you, because that would be hard.
I do teach. So in fact, part of this project with the Seeing the Snowies thing, they've given me the grant for is that I'm teaching community groups. And so I've actually got to get up and start advertising that. So I'm just going to do some, you know, workshops. Look, I mean, I can do workshops. I mean, I've been teaching photography ever since I can remember. And, you know, I also teach skiing as well. So, yeah, I would say I'm a fairly natural coach and teacher. But it's really interesting. I have a bit more, you know, and like I've taught right across the board. I taught at North Sydney for years. I mean, I've taught remote Aboriginal communities. I've taught culturally and linguistically diverse populations in Western Sydney. I worked on a project called The Magic Carpet, where we taught kids in Arthur Phillip School in Parramatta, Guildford, and Parramatta High. So I taught a lot of kids.
I went there. I went to Parramatta High School.
Did you? It's, yeah.
Rory Campbell, the arts teacher there, Mr. Campbell. Maybe not.
Mr. Campbell. No, we didn't actually go through the arts department. It was actually a bit strange. We went through sort of like their English sort of area, which was, so there was 4 of us. So there was me, Aween, Akon, Rahula, and Nasir. Rahula and Nasir were 2 Hazara boys. Akon is a South Sudanese woman, and Aween is a Pakistani woman. And so we all got together, and I taught digital storytelling. So we were working with digital cameras and trying to get kids to make scripts and, you know, make little plays and do photos and do stories with them. And the ladies were doing henna. So they were telling their cultural stories through their henna. And the boys were doing kites. And so they used to make kites. And because the kite maker, is it called The Kite Flyer? It's a very famous Afghan movie. And it came out roughly the same time that we were doing that. And it's in one of the big sports in Afghanistan. It's, fighting kites, yeah. And so we, you know, they're not allowed to bring in from Afghanistan the stuff that cuts the string. But, you know, like they made the kites and they were like full on into it. So, so I worked with them for a couple of years and we had a lovely time working with the kids because, you know, they were a real team. And at the time there was a lot of stuff going on about de-radicalisation programs and stuff like that. So we loosely fit into that kind of thing. And unfortunately, when we were at Arthur Phillip, 3 weeks after we started there, the young Iraqi or Iranian boy shot the police accountant at just down the road. So that was really, really tragic.
That was in the last 15 years, because I remember that. I was a student in Parramatta High School. Wow.
Yeah. Well, we were there at that time. I was teaching
Wow.
So that would have been, when was that? That was
I might have been a student then.
yeah, you probably were. I'm just trying to think what year it was. So I did teach there. I mean, it was fantastic. And I also taught
Like these type of educational content, people want to learn, like all these tips that you share. You should put it on your social media. Like if you do have time, like start a YouTube channel where you literally just teach people what you teach in those workshops and put it online. And usually if it's a how-to videos do so well. But yeah, I think photographers trying to monetize their photos and take really nice photos, like that's really hard to grow because everyone's taking photos. But if you're out here teaching people how to do lighting, how to color grade, how to pick the best photos, like your whole process, the camera setup, like that's like 10 different video ideas, and those videos would get you attraction and views as long as YouTube is up.
It's interesting. There's a lot of competition in that area, I have to say. I actually, hang on, I'll tell you when.
But none of those people have gotten a Time magazine cover.
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a lot of competition in the teaching online. I actually have a course out there. I don't know if anyone's making any money out of it or whether it's still available, but I did the filming for a beginner's course. Oh, that would have been 2013, 2014. I haven't actually done anything myself in that space because there is a lot of competition. You have to be very good at marketing yourself to get into those kind of things. And I just at the moment, I want to concentrate on doing this project, which is, the local project, which I think has real legs as an exhibition, and also working on the masters. So, I do all right. I've done all right out of my industry, believe me. I mean, like I managed to make a living and survive. I think I have a lot of knowledge that I'd like to share, and, like I could potentially do the social media teaching thing, and I've certainly got everything sorted out to do it. It's just getting the time. It's just finding time. I've got a lot going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe when I finish the masters, I'll really start going into, what I would like to do is something along the lines of, you see the Masterclass.
Yes.
They've got really good content, and the tutor just sits there and talks, which I'm extremely good at. I don't really want to be teaching people how to use a camera anymore because, I've done years of that and it just becomes repetitive and it drives me insane. The sort of students that I want are people that actually already have kind of an idea of what it is but just need direction. So, yeah, I'd be up for that for sure. If you want to do a combined podcast, you've got the marketing brains. You can see I can talk, so, certainly I'll be up for it. Go 50-50 with you.
Yeah, because I just brought that up because, like, that's sort of how I sort of really got into the education space. Like, I knew how to build online businesses, and at the beginning I was teaching people how to build an online website, how to buy a domain, and after 2 years of doing, I got sick of that as well. Like, I don't want to guide people through that process. I want to be able to help people grow, how to teach them how to hire people, teach them how to scale, teach them how to optimize little things. So people who already had knowledge, so then I had to sort of pivot my content in a bit. But I think, it is a bit difficult trying to attract the types of clients you want. And I'm still trying to crack that piece. But I think content is definitely key, but you're right, there's so much competition out there. But I think you'll do really well online. Once you've had time, like I think you have the right personality for YouTube, TikTok, and LinkedIn.
Yeah, I probably do. I can talk until I'm underwater. Everyone knows that. They call me Have a Chat Hogben, but I think, it's difficulty is that you do have to promote it, and you do have to be like ruthless in the way that you promote it. And I think that that's always the main question for creative people, is that there is business, which is business promotion, and then there is creativity, whereby you do what you actually want to do. And it doesn't necessarily make you any money, but it does give you a great deal of satisfaction. So again, it's coming down to those kind of issues, really. And I mean, it's difficult to mesh the two. I mean, you've got to have a business brain and a creative brain. And I think, ultimately, anything that's done purely commercially has a certain feel, it has a certain look, it has a certain lack of depth, because you're just churning it out, and I don't really want to, if I do online courses, I want to appeal to people that, want more knowledge at a very deep level, as opposed to, someone that wants to learn how to turn their camera on and off. So it's quite a different market. It's the thing is that you do the online courses to do the in-person courses, which I find more useful. And, there's certainly a marketing route that I can go with that, but it's just, as I said, at the moment, it's finding time. So hopefully before, I kick off, I can do a masterclass.
Yeah. And maybe you can just even reach out to Masterclass. Be like, hey, here are my credentials. Here's what I've done. I'd love to be one of the instructors and teach people how to become a journalist.
Yeah, well, there's that too, for sure. But they seem to have very high profile people, American people that they're working with. So, that may or may not be a thing. One of the nicest ones that I think that they brought out, though, was he's a black philosopher. Oh, his name evades me at the moment as well, but he was absolutely genius. So I would have liked to have done that course, but I didn't actually do it. So, but just from the snippets I saw, I was like, oh, wow, I'd love to do that.
I really appreciated your time today, Lisa. I had a lot of fun listening over the last 2 hours. Where can people find out more about what you do and follow you, Lisa?
Okay, well, I have a website, so it's www.lisahogben.com. So that's LISAHOGBEN.com. I have links onto my Instagram, which is just Lisa Hogben. I have another Instagram called Snowy Mountains Oz. I have another one called The Essential Storyteller. They all do different things. The Essential Storyteller is a content creation thing, which I haven't put much effort into, but, I will. That's coming up in the future, in the very near future. Snowy Mountains Oz is the stuff that I do, hopefully to get sponsorship for my World Championships. So they're all kind of separate areas, which sort of makes it more work, really. I have a Twitter feed, which is just Lisa Hogben Photo. What else have I got? I do have a TikTok, but I haven't really gotten into TikTok, mainly because that's actually that's fairly time consuming. So I haven't done that either. But so Twitter, Instagram, I am on Facebook. That's mainly my controversial issues. So you can, if you put me in as Lisa Hogben photojournalist, I come up kind of everywhere, really. But, the main two are lisahogben.com on the website, the Instagram, Lisa Hogben, and Snowy Mountains Oz, probably the three, and my Lisa Hogben photo. So, yeah, so generally that will keep you up to date with where I am and what I'm doing. I do think that, after I finish this master's, that I probably will do a lot more teaching, and it's very possible that the Essential Storyteller will become a platform for the teaching as well. So, so watch this space.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I really appreciate your time today. I just love how passionate you are and how, you've lived a long field life and you have this wealth of knowledge, and and there's just so much. Like, we probably only sort of scratched the tip of the iceberg, but thank you so much for your passion and energy today.
Look, Andy, it's been lovely to talk to you. It's very rare that you meet another inquiring mind. And I think that, that is the most important thing that anyone can have, is an inquiring mind. And my hat's off to you, because, you just love knowledge, and I love that. It's wonderful.
Thank you so much, Lisa. That's another episode of the podcast. If you guys made it this far, really, really appreciate your time. This has been a long episode. Drop in the comments if you guys made it this far. Let me know what your thoughts are. And thank you so much for your time. I'll see you guys next week with another episode. And yeah, that's the podcast. Peace.